Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. We like to think we've come a long way from that day in 1633 when Galileo was convicted of heresy for saying the earth revolved around the sun. Since the Age of Enlightenment, we have championed belief in reason and scientific evidence to explain natural phenomena. Yet now we are experiencing a disrespect for science, with dogma and politics replacing the scientific method. In the face of this threat, some thought it was time to take action. On April 22nd, scientists and their supporters participated in the March for Science to advocate for scientific research and science-based policies. Today we'll talk to one of the co-founders of that event, as well as a professor of science education, to examine the current dangers to science and what we can all do to combat it. All of this coming up now on EdCast.
John F. Kennedy promised this nation that by the end of the 60s we'd land on the moon. Now, almost 50 years later, we have an American president disparaging the facts, denigrating science, and we're here to tell him that science matters.
Science is universal. Science brings out the best in us. With an informed, optimistic view of the future together, we can, dare I say it, save the world!
My guests today are Caroline Weinberg and Gillian Bayne. Caroline Weinberg is a doctor, science writer, and public health educator focusing on adolescent reproductive health and access to care in low-income communities. She was national co-chair of the March for Science. Gillian Bayne is a professor of science education in the middle and high school education department at Lehman College. She is also on the faculty of the CUNY Graduate Center in the urban education department. Her research focuses on improving teaching and learning science through the use of cutting-edge practices and methodologies. Her forthcoming book is Underrepresented Scientists of Color: Progressive Visions for Science Learning and Student Engagement. Thank you so much, Caroline Weinberg and Gillian Bayne, for joining us today on EdCast to talk about this very important topic of the state of science in our country today. Caroline, I want to start with you since you're co-founder and co-organizer of the March for Science. What was the impetus for that? What prompted it?
So all of us came at it for kind of different reasons. The reason I ended up there was because I was having a conversation one morning with a friend who works in climate change research, particularly in education, and she got a letter from her boss saying she could no longer do her job and communicate. And I was, outraged and was like, we should march on Washington. And so I went on Twitter, which is where these things seem to start. And some people were talking about it, and I kind of got involved. And in the midst of having this conversation, it all of a sudden kind of exploded and went viral. So I found myself kind of in the middle of it. And that's how I got involved.
How does something like this go from an idea? I mean, for people like me who have trouble organizing a dinner party, I mean, how do you organize a big march on Washington?
So before the march, the biggest thing I had organized was my parents' surprising wedding anniversary party. So it was a little bit of a shift from that. It took off kind of before any of us had a chance to really think about it and how to get it started. The plan had originally in my head been to have a mission statement and have a team and have all of these things set up, and then all of a sudden we kind of blinked and went from 50 followers to 30,000, and there was kind of no going back. But what was great about it was that the Women's March had kind of set this precedent where there's no such thing as like one march anymore. As soon as a march was announced in DC, because DC is kind of, where I guess the natural inclination is to kind of start a movement like this. And then immediately people popped up all over the world. You know, I'm going to do one in San Francisco, I'm going to do one in Boston, I'm going to do one in New York, and it kind of exploded from there. It had nothing to do with us. You know, we had put the idea out there, but people were just kind of waiting for it to be kicked off, and then there were all of these, you know, hundreds of thousands of people waiting to get started.
Who were the people who signed on early? I know you said you wanted to get universities involved. Were they quick to join?
No, actually. My original concept was like, oh, universities will like sign on, it'll be totally easy, this thing will plan itself. It turned out that they were not. And we started really with the scientific societies because the kind of, you know, obviously it's a march for science, and so people kind of more quickly went to the idea of scientists being involved, even though it was very clear very quickly that it was about way more than just scientists. But the scientific societies really came on first, and then we expanded to, you know, teachers associations came on board, and museums and aquariums, and then universities were like the very last ones to trickle in. Although CUNY was one of our first universities. So
now, what did you all hope to accomplish as a result of the march?
The march itself was really just about kind of raising awareness for the fact that science has a critical role in society and needs to be kind of celebrated and defended and have a role in policy. The fact that it exists to give us answers about the world, and we should be using those answers to set policy and to determine our future. But so really what the march itself did was kind of raise awareness for that, and did that, you know, very effectively, and we were really kind of proud and happy about how many people came out. And then the long-term movement is focused on how to make that kind of immediate passion translate into lasting change.
Okay. Now, I want to ask each of you, I mean, it seems to me that we need a march like this because people seem to have forgotten the importance of science in everyday life. Why do you think that that's happened? Gillian, let me ask you as a science educator. Why do you think?
I think that there are many, many reasons. I mean, life is getting more and more complex, but I think also there in the schools, you know, there's really not enough time to give to the sciences, I think, to really go in depth in understanding what it is, exploring, etc. And so I think that that there's a movement, I guess, that's more focused on things like standardized exams and gold star exams and so forth.
And what do you think, Caroline, from your perspective?
I think science was miscast as a partisan issue, which made it really easy for people to kind of reject and ignore it.
What do you mean by that?
So,
partisan meaning it's just for left?
Yeah, that it was that like
liberals?
Exactly, that the idea that there are only like certain areas or certain parties that kind of ascribe to science, and that it's not an issue of kind of the other side.
Tragic, which is science.
I mean, it's nuts, for lack of a better word. I mean, because science should be informing all policies. Like, it's not, whether or not you choose to kind of respect and understand and believe in science, it's still affecting your life. And so I think trying to shift that concept, trying to make sure that everyone is educated in science, and that we make sure that it's kind of understood and appreciated across the board, is the way to kind of get people back into it.
So it seems to me that it would be really important to connect with people who don't necessarily share these views, and that education would be a pivotal way of doing that. So I want to ask Gillian, as a science educator, what can education do, and what are some of the impediments that you see to science education and STEM in our classes
first of
today?
all, there, you know, in the Bronx here, I mean, it's clear that there's a radical inequity. You know, resources, human and material resources, are definitely not shared equally across the city. People have more exposures to being in science, to dealing with people in science, for example. So it's really, I think, a matter of having the right kind of exposures, having exposures, period. You know, and having access to those things that are needed in order to keep enthusiasm and keep interest and keep motivation alive in the classrooms.
So you've done a lot of work with middle and high school, right? You coordinated a program at Lehman for middle and high school education. What do you see going on there that needs to be done that's not being done right now? for science education?
Well, first of all, I think there needs to be a radical shift in the way that we think about science teaching and learning.
How so?
And I think we really need to focus on the fact that teachers aren't always teachers and students aren't always the learners, but it's really a dialectical relationship whereby we're learning from our students, students are learning from us, and that it really, I think, needs to be more of a level playing field in that students' voices and students' perceptions and understandings of what they might need to become fluent and to become stronger in the content, I think is needed, because they've been in school for you know, all their lives. They know what works well for them, and having you know, a prescribed protocol doesn't work for everyone.
So what would be some strategies that you might use in the classroom today for science education?
Well, first of all, with teachers, I would encourage them to really explore this notion of being reflective. And in the middle of the day, all during the day, there are 1,000,001 things that teachers have to think about. And so it's really, you know, needs to be a conscious effort to think about what's happening in the classroom, why is it happening, and then generate a strategy or learn about a strategy or methodology to address those issues. And so I think along those lines, again, students can be invaluable in talking about what's needed, in working together with teachers to change what is needed in the classroom to be more involved and stronger, again, in the content.
And now you mentioned the phrase co-generative dialogue. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, well, co-generative dialogues. I used co-generative dialogugues actually when I was a secondary science teacher.
And what is a co-generative dialogue?
A co-generative dialogue is really being involved with your students, maybe inviting you know, a diverse array of students to have a conversation about what's working and what's not working in the classroom, to really generate a plan by which those things can be addressed, and then also to hold people accountable for what is agreed upon. So there's an agreed upon measure and then an accountability factor. And so we really emphasize the need for diverse voices. So we'll have maybe strong students and maybe some who are having challenges, maybe you know, an equal number of males and females, to really have an opportunity for polysemia and polyphonia, you know, really being able to listen and getting different perspectives and understanding those perspectives.
Now you have maintained that power culture and social dynamics play a role in terms of STEM education and STEM learning.
Oh,
yes. Do you want to just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. So when we think about let's say culture, you know, we talk about the relationship between one's beliefs and practices, and I think with culture there are several forms of culture. So when talking about, for example, social culture, we can look at a student who has a certain socioeconomical background, and you know, there's so many things, again, that come into play, but let's just say that you know, certain beliefs might be inscribed in that student by teachers, administrators. You know, a student may not have, again, the same kind of exposures in science. So I think definitely, again, there's the capital, and students, all students, no matter who they are, bring some form of capital to the classroom. And so you may have someone who is, you know, who's not, you know, maybe the best academic student or someone who misbehaves, but they are bringing something of value to the classroom. And I think it's really important for students and teachers to recognize that that does exist. Who really is valuable in this field of science? Whose voices are valuable? I mean, there's a plethora of voices and people and beliefs and so forth who kind of get, you know, pushed by the wayside. And so I think there needs to be an understanding of the value of diversity of students, what they bring, the capital that they bring, the social capital, the family capital that comes into play also in the classroom.
I want to ask you both. I'm sorry, Carolyn, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I think that part of that is also that the scientific community as a whole has done a really kind of not great job of kind of continuing to communicate work and why science is amazing, and to kind of take science out of scientific conferences and from behind paywalls and actually continue to have these conversations. And I think that engaging the scientific community in schools and having them kind of talk about their work and making sure that it is a diverse group of voices. It's not just like the kind of older white men who you see on the news talking about science, but you bring in diverse scientists so you don't just learn about, you know, elements in chemistry, but you bring in an actual chemist and talk about how, like, I mean, science is amazing. Like, we should be communicating that better.
And there's so few of them, you know, so few of those who are really represented in the students, and the students are represented racially and ethnically in these types of scientists. And so I think, you know, there needs to be a stronger effort really in not only, you know, encouraging people to go into STEM, but really having stronger efforts in sustaining them. And then even when they get into the university, for example, you know, create environments whereby they can really flourish. And so it's really a big problem in underrepresented scientists of color to really have all of the resources that others have to make them successful.
How did the two of you get involved? I'm so pleased to have two women here to talk about science, because I think women are certainly underrepresented in science, for sure. We know that as well. What are some of the ways that you each got involved in science? I mean, you became a physician. I mean, what were some of the ways that you could do that?
I mean, for me, it was my parents. I would
Okay,
give the credit
right. So you were exposed early on.
I was exposed to it early on, and I had you know, teachers who were really passionate about science, and I just kind of, I just always wanted to know how things worked. I was just always really interested in that, and science kind of brought that out. You know,
did not get a message that it would not be for you.
No, you see, I never really did because, and I completely credit kind of my parents and my teachers with that there was never a question in my mind that because I was a woman, I shouldn't be doing that. But I think because I kind of grew up around women who were scientists, but I think that that's part of why the representation is so important, because one thing to kind of focus on getting more diverse voices into the lab and into the field and actually doing the science. But if you continue to only highlight non-diverse voices when you're actually kind of talking about science in the public, it doesn't matter who's behind the scenes because the representation still isn't there, so people still are going to think it's not for them. So
and what about you, Julia? How did you develop your interest in science and science
I'm one
education?
of six children, and my family came from South America to this country, and so our family actually has, there are a lot of people who are scholars, who are teachers, who are physicians in our family. And so while I did have that support, familial support, still walking in the skin that I walk in, it has been a tremendous challenge in many, many ways. And from a small child in high school, and definitely in college, where the weeding out, you know, of students takes place. And then, you know, people just telling you frankly, oh, you can't do this, or what do you think you're doing?
Because you're a woman of color, or because you're a woman?
Yes, because I'm a black woman.
Black woman, okay.
And because, you know, racism exists. It's real. And for those people who think that it doesn't, you know, it's a fallacy. You know, we know, I know, because I live in the skin day in and day out. And so I think when I think about, you know, Black and brown students, for example, you know, I really feel connected in really a strong desire to create a better situation for them. But it's very, very difficult. I don't think anyone, if they're really honest, any science related persons, you know, physician and researcher, would say that it's been a breeze.
It wasn't until I was older and kind of higher up in the hierarchy, so to speak. Like when I felt less like in high school and college, but when I was in medical school and even planning the march in a lot of ways, like you become much more aware of the fact that I was never kind of as acutely aware of the fact that as a woman, people sometimes just didn't want me in that space until I was older.
I want to go back a step. This week there was an article in the New York Times, and it talked about a classroom teacher who was trying to teach climate change to his students. And he was met with a great deal of skepticism. He tells a story of a young woman in his classroom who, I don't know if she came from a coal family, but her attitude was that, you know, science is wrong about a lot of things. So why do I have to believe that science is right about climate change? And the article recounted how many obstacles she put up in that classroom to that teacher who was trying to teach climate change. So that's something that's happening in our, you know, when we're hoping that science education is happening in the classroom, how do we help teachers who, you know, the attitude is if science can't be 100% correct all the time, then it's 100% wrong most of the time. So, I mean, what does a teacher do?
I think in an instance like that, you have to really offer students an opportunity to see for themselves, you know, to gather the data, to analyze the data and draw their own conclusions by being in the field and doing the work themselves.
We do, yeah, we do a really poor job of teaching the scientific method. Like we should be telling people that science is never 100%. You're supposed to repeat experiments and continue to do research and seek answers and question what we know. And so you shouldn't deny that, but part of teaching that is also, how did you arrive at this? What is the scientific method? How did this happen? And so give her the numbers and have her run them, you know, teach kids how to run them themselves.
You know, he was saying, he showed them charts, he showed them all these things on climate change, and there just was a lot of skepticism about believing what science has to say. I'm sure that is the reason why we needed a march.
Yeah.
Because we have, right, so we are running out of time, so I want to ask you both, how would you like to move forward in this sphere? I'm going to start with you, Caroline, from the political perspective. I know you were interested in seeing that we should make policy based on science. What would you like to see happen now?
I think we need to, as a scientific community, we need to engage the public better in why science is so important and how it serves society, and broaden science so that it's accessible to everyone. I think that if we did a good job of that, people would advocate for science the way they do for any other cause they believe in, because it's what's determining our present and future. I mean, every single policy, from healthcare to funding of Head Start to environmental decisions, like these things are all can be informed by science and research if we actually listen to it. So, yeah.
And what do you think?
I think,
what would you like to do moving forward?
I think I would really like to make stronger efforts in including those who have been marginalized from the field, because there's a tremendous amount of potential in them, untapped genius. And I think if we're really thinking about moving our agenda forward as far as being really people who are on the cutting edge in science, we have to really look at those places that we have been ignoring, and ignoring them for a variety of reasons. You know, some people's lives are not as valuable, so to speak, as others. At least that's oftentimes the feeling that people have.
I want to thank you both for joining me today. We're out of time. Caroline Weinberg, co-chair of the National March for Science and science writer, and Gillian Bayne, science educator here at Lehman and the CUNY Graduate Center. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we go to our Ed Bites, we're going to end with a clip of Bill Nye talking about the value of science from the beginning of America. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
The framers of the Constitution of the United States, which has become a model for constitutional governments everywhere, included Article 1, Section 8, which refers to promoting the progress of science and useful arts. Its intent is to motivate innovators and drive the economy by means of just laws. They knew that without the progress of science and useful arts, of engineering, our economy would falter. Without scientifically literate citizens, the United States, any country, in fact, cannot compete on the world stage.
back to this edition of Ed Bites. Maybe you've seen this newest craze. It's a fidget spinner. Some say it helps kids concentrate, and others say it drives them to distraction. Education Week reports that some teachers are seizing on this craze as a way to teach science, writing, technology, and math. For example, teachers ask students to figure out how spinners work, comparing weight, circumference, and size. In other classes, students write opinion pieces for or against spinners in the classroom. Lesson learned, even a distracting toy can become a pedagogical tool. According to Rethinking Education, the Trump education budget lavishes money on charter and voucher schools and steals from public school children. It gives $500 million more for charter schools, up 50% from current funding, $250 million to expand and study voucher schools, and $1 billion more to encourage school choice within districts. On the other hand, the Trump education budget represents serious cuts to many programs that educators and parents value. While some of these cuts have received attention, Politico reports on other programs also facing elimination. The Trump administration proposes to scrap gifted and talented programs looking to identify potential students from low-income families, foreign language studies, Special Olympics funding, and campus child care, among others. Over the years, EdCast has repeatedly reported on research relating to the effect of video games on learning. Mostly we find good news from one study and bad news from another. Confusion reigns. So now the latest study, which reports that video games may boost learning. According to this report, 8th grade students who learned U.S. history with the help of short video games showed improved critical thinking skills. A Florida study showed that video game use in some schools boosted students' vocabularies. We promise to keep you updated on this ever-changing research. That's it for this edition of EdCast. Till next time, class dismissed.